Hi, I'm Juliet.
And I'm Peter.
And I'm a licensed therapist.
And I'm not.
And this is Intrusive Plots, a podcast about OCD in movies and TV.
Well, this is the first time we've ever done this. I've never hosted a podcast before. I don't know if you have or haven't.
I have not.
I have appeared on podcasts with awful Zoom audio.
Good thing we don't have that.
I inherited this microphone from my friend, but then I went out of my way to then buy a stand and like a shock mount and several other things that made this less of an inheritance and more just stuff filling up my office room. But hey, here we are. We're going to talk about a doozy of a movie. Wouldn't you describe it that way?
That is a good way to start. Yes. The phrase that was coming up for me was as good as it gets. This might be as good as OCD representation gets for 97. I have never this was my first time seeing it, and people have referenced it with me, and I've never been able to give my 2 cents. And now I'll be giving my 2 cents, and they might not want it, but they're going to get it. Because that was quite a movie. And I'm glad we started with it.
Okay. I'm going to go out on a limb and say I didn't dislike this movie. I thought that there were some odd choices for a rom-com. I think we disagree on this next point. I'm a big Jack Nicholson fan. Yeah. I love Jack Nicholson. I love a lot of the stuff that he's brought into The Departed, The Shining, a lot of these movies. So this movie was written and directed by a man named James L. Brooks, who is also known for Terms of Endearment, and he also worked with Jack Nicholson on that film. As Good as It Gets also won 2 Oscars, one for Jack Nicholson and one for Helen Hunt. I'm a big Jack Nicholson fan. I do think that this is not One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. It doesn't structure itself like a dark comedy / drama / examination on the human condition in the way that perhaps they wanted it to. I read some piece of trivia that I don't think I can potentially quote that said something along the lines of, oh, we just kind of found it was a rom-com in the footage. We didn't originally intend it for it to be a rom-com. And I'm just like, that actually kind of reads.
That makes a lot of sense.
In this 1997 film, As Good as It Gets, IMDb describes it as a single mother and waitress, a misanthropic author, and a gay artist form an unlikely friendship. This is on IMDb. Form an unlikely friendship after the artist is assaulted in a robbery. And a lot of this movie requires us to see Melvin, Jack Nicholson's character's name. His guy is kind of like a rough around the edges, like, oh, he's gruff on the outside, but oh, there's a little spark of gold in there. We'll find it, like we're supposed to kind of find that within him. And it's tough to do that when every other thing he says is like the worst thing in the world.
It was definitely, I kept waiting for that moment of like, oh, he's good at, like, I get it. He's doing the best he can, and like kind of that, the rough around the edges, the facade to kind of come down, and there to be the kind of more positive traits. But it felt like we would get glimmers for maybe like a millisecond, and then the next moment there would be some sort of like racial slur or homophobic jab.
Just take us right back to the 90s.
Yeah, so there were glimmers.
There were glimmers. I did track the first positive moment the film intended to have with Melvin. I was like, wait, the music, this is where we're supposed to actually like relate to this guy. How many minutes in are we? And the answer was 23. We were 23 minutes in before, and this was a bit in the movie about how he relates to... He says something nice about Helen Hunt's character's asthmatic son, and he shows like a bit of compassion, and then the score by none other than Hans Zimmer, which is the strangest rom-com composer I've ever heard in my life. Hans Zimmer is, if you don't know, is famous for like Christopher Nolan and Dune and Batman and big, like, boom, 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 boom kind of movies. So here we have him in a rom-com. Anyway, so a lovely little jingle tells us that Melvin is starting to open up to us. Of course, then he goes on and says, like, again, the worst thing in the whole world. So it's just, I found it interesting, the standards of what the line is to walk is very different than it is now. I think I told you this before, one comparison I like is with Die Hard. In Die Hard, 2/3 through the movie, there's a cop side character, and the cop side character just goes, ugh.
Yes.
Like his big dark revelation was like, it was dark and I shot a kid and I killed him. And then the audience is supposed to be like, oh no, you can pick yourself back up, like, and today's audiences would look at that and go, huh? Anyway, so let's talk about Melvin, shall we?
I think that's a good place to start. Yes. So the first scene shows Melvin in his home, his apartment, as they say. And we see him, he's wearing gloves on his hands, presumably to avoid like coming in contact with some sort of germs or dirt or something like that. And he's trying to get this dog into the elevator so he doesn't have to deal with it. We don't know who the dog belongs to. We really don't know anything. Also, when I read the synopsis before I watched the movie, I read it while I was busy with something else. So the whole time I was waiting for there to be a murder. There was not a murder.
What did you think was going to happen in this film? What were you doing to have the word murder filled into your brain?
I think my brain heard assault, and I thought it was going to be a detective movie, to be honest. And I think that is Monk.
Or Chinatown, where with Jack Nicholson, and he's like wearing like a big hat, and he'll be like, ugh, this must be as good as it gets here in Chinatown.
I guess I would like to start with some of the parts about Melvin's character that I did like in terms of the way that they showed OCD. And then I can talk about, more about the representation, the way that it wasn't super accurate. But one thing I thought they did a really good job of was showing how isolating living with OCD can be. So the more we learn about this character, we learn that he works from home, and this was way pre-COVID. This is 97. He's a writer. He doesn't seem to have any friends, any connections. He is very, very, very cut off from the world. The place he feels comfortable is this diner, but in order to get there, there's a lot of different compulsions he has to do, like walking a specific way and not touching the cracks on the sidewalk and wearing gloves. There's a lot of things he has to do just to be able to leave. And that is a big part of OCD for a lot of people, where, it makes their world very small, and it can really be incredibly, all-consuming. What did you think of that part?
So coming from a filmmaker's angle, and one thing that I kind of want to do in this podcast is that I can kind of speak a little bit to how folks show this from the outside in on the, this visual medium we have. One thing that I saw that I did like was, because this is a rom-com and not anything super psychological in terms of like a subjective experience. It's not like Exposure. It's not like Matchstick Men, which we may or may not cover. It's not like other things where we see kind of inside his head. We just see the results, which kind of emphasizes his impact on other people. So they kind of show OCD in kind of its social results of, he's isolated and it's lost him a lot of friends, it's lost him a lot of contacts. One thing that I did notice a little bit was that there were like 2 or 3 other problems he had that also isolated him from other people, and the movie did kind of stir those together a little bit. One thing that I might critique is that his OCD was kind of put in the same category as his other less than desirable parts of him, where it's like, oh, this guy's the worst, he's racist and he has this obnoxious mental illness, and it's like the movie wanted us to think that those results were kind of similar. So in that way, it's tough to say this because in a lot of cases, OCD does make you less relatable to other people, and you don't have the time nor bandwidth to describe every little thing to everybody. I take a little hesitation with putting those things in kind of the same bucket.
Yeah, I agree. I think the aspect that felt really not kind of how I know OCD to be and how I know a lot of people who have OCD to experience, the way the movie showed him with his kind of compulsive behaviors, we didn't see a lot of anxiety in him. It was all anger. Like, he would get angry, he would be upset, but it didn't seem that his like distress was caused a lot from something internal. It was more like everyone else is the problem, and I'm doing this and this is the way I live my life. Like, even at the end, he said, you changed my whole life and it's not the way it used to be, and I want to go back to how it used to be. I'm paraphrasing, but that was the kind of vibe he gave off, which when we think of OCD, the symptoms are ego dystonic, which means they go against a person's values. They go against a person's kind of wishes. So a person would not want to be living completely isolated. It would be something they feel they have to do versus something that is like, yes, I like it this way because X, Y, and Z. So in a lot of ways, a lot of his kind of characteristics reminded me more of obsessive compulsive personality disorder, which is egosyntonic, which means a person doesn't see as much difficulty with their symptoms. Like their symptoms cause them to have a really hard time creating relationships and have a really hard time connecting with people and holding jobs. But we also see people with OCPD are incredibly kind of like work driven. You know, he's written all these books. He has clearly a lot of money from his famous literary works. So we saw some of the compulsions of like washing his hands with hot water, which I thought they did a good job of because they showed, you know, like he was in pain, but he still had to do it. But then they also showed his M&Ms were color coordinated and his stacks of paper were color coded, and all of his books were arranged and his music was all labeled. And while some people do have organizing and arranging compulsions, the kind of general like stereotype about people with OCD being like neat freaks and people who like can't stand to see something like even a teeny bit off, that's not always how it looks. And it felt to me like they were just kind of like, oh, what's OCD? Oh, it's probably this. Let's show this.
Well, especially what's OCD and what's the, this guy's the worst versions of OCD, like the Van Halen sort the M&Ms thing, you know, like
Yes.
we've all heard that famous urban legend that Van Halen required all our M&Ms to be sorted, not from a result of obsession, but from a result of you need to read the entire contract. But that's a story for another day. But yeah, one thing that I noticed, I think you also noticed, is he says this line like, yeah, you're going to die, we're going to die, we're all going to die, in kind of like a disdainful way. And I feel like at the core of obsession is a fear of this happening, not kind of this blasé attitude. That could be deep down, but what do you think?
Oh, I completely agree, especially when we see someone primarily with like contamination-based obsessions and compulsions. You know, he's going out of his way to prevent himself from touching anyone, to avoid using the silverware that has been at the restaurant, he doesn't want to touch the dog. He doesn't even let people into his home. And while some people with contamination OCD are more afraid of getting sick or being uncomfortable because they're sick, the fear of this unknown thing, like death, is so common for people with OCD. And another thing with that is most people I know with OCD are like just so empathetic, and they often always feel like everyone hates them, and they go out of their way to be really kind and to be very good people. And for him, he didn't seem to mind at all how his actions were causing like distress to others, like kind of stalking someone, showing up at their house in the middle of the night, barging into his psychiatrist's office without making an appointment and demanding help in that moment, calling people like racial and cultural and homophobic slurs. Like there were a lot of things he did that I just am thinking, But obviously, people are complex, and some people with OCD can be rude. But I think my problem is I just had a really hard time connecting with Melvin's character, and my urge is to be like, let's put him away from the OCD community because it's not a good representation.
He's not representative of my clients. Every single one of my clients are the best ones.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of interesting depictions, I liked his neighbor a lot because his neighbor, I wouldn't say was an offensive depiction of an LGBT person. That dude was an offensive depiction of an artist. That guy comes in, he's like, oh my goodness, I need to paint you. As if every painter is like, oh, you sat in a certain way. Oh, Helen Hunt, let me paint you right now.
I would want to paint her. She looks so good. Her back.
Oh yeah, that back and that towel. Oh yeah, you just need to set up an easel right then and there. Everyone around Melvin was so likable, and the movie had to insert a hate crime in the first 20 minutes to make us look at Melvin better by comparison. I mean, like, that was, sure, the catalyst to give him the dog to then teach him some empathy or whatnot. And by the way, one amazing moment that was very relatable for me was when on the first or second day of having the dog is outside just kind of hanging out in the diner, and Helen Hunt comes up to him and goes, are you not worried that someone's going to touch him? And then Melvin says, well, I wasn't until now, and then runs up and grabs the dog. And that I found very relatable.
Yes. What did you think of the part when he's walking with the dog on the sidewalk and the dog starts to model some of Melvin's behavioral compulsions?
Well, it was sort of meant to be kind of like a sweet moment where the dog like looks at him like people haven't been looking at him and accesses his soft side. Like that's kind of what the moment was supposed to be. Granted, we, on the other side of this, know that, you know, reassuring compulsions is not the best thing in the whole wide world. One thing I will say is this has nothing to do with anything, but when they were shooting that scene, the director, Brooks, would put something that the dog didn't want to step on the crack, and then so the dog would just automatically step over it, and then they would digitally remove the thing on the sidewalk in post, and I thought that was pretty fun.
And that's why it won an Oscar.
Exactly.
Or multiple Oscars.
It won multiple Oscars. Honestly, the dog's acting was incredible. Very well-trained movie dog.
Verdell, I'd like to see an interview with Verdell, the dog character.
I couldn't find an interview with Jack Nicholson. So, yeah, I'd love to see. Yeah, I've seen interviews with Helen Hunt, and I believe the other actor's name is Greg Kinnear. Is that right? Yes. And then Cuba Gooding Jr. for the first half of the movie.
I liked his character a lot.
I loved his character, and I don't know, like for the short amount of time he was in the movie, we clearly knew what he wanted. We sided with him. We saw his frustrations with Melvin. We saw the fact he has this little spiel at the beginning where it's like, you listen to me. I like Simon, and Simon loves this dog. You are going to take care of this dog. And I'm like, wow, what simple, powerful, yes, I like this character.
I also liked how he was one of the few characters, especially in the beginning, who really did not enable Melvin's kind of behaviors or didn't really allow him to kind of fully do the things that are quote unquote his OCD versus other things. You know, he was like, you're taking the dog whether you like it or not. I don't give an F about, you know, why you don't want to have this dog. You're going to take it. And that actually was, you know, one of the things that really helped him the most throughout the movie was having this new sense of purpose. And then that opened the door for the other little glimmers of growth that we saw sprinkled throughout the 2 hours and 19 minutes of this movie.
This was a 2 hour and 19-minute romantic comedy.
I started it at 9 a.m. because I knew if I waited, I'm sitting on my couch. I've never watched a movie at 9 a.m.
You watched this at 9?
I'm sitting on my couch because it was before I worked, and I was like, I'll get this, I'll watch it. But I did not expect it to be that long. I thought it would be like an hour and like 30, an hour, 40 minutes, and like 2 hours. And I'm like, how long is this? I ate breakfast and lunch while watching that movie.
That is amazing. There's also, if you go back and look at sort of the, like scrub through the timeline of the movie, the romantic chemistry between Melvin and Carol doesn't really start until like an hour and a half in. Until like kind of the road trip where her son, I think, scored a goal and she's like, let's go out dancing or let's go out drinking or something. And that's the first situation where like, oh, maybe there's something there. And like the movie's already so far, like almost over, you know?
One thought I did have, one part I actually kind of liked related to that was, this might be a controversial take, but when she was like, oh, what did you think would happen? You know, they have their first kiss. Sorry, spoiler, there is a kiss. She's like, what did you think would happen when I came on this trip with you? The three of them go on this trip, and she's like, oh, why did you want me to be here? And his first reaction is to say, well, I thought maybe you could, you know, like seduce Simon or have sex with Simon, so that way he wouldn't come on to me or something of that nature. Do you remember that part?
I do. And it was right after you make me want to be a better man.
Yes.
Right after the big moment in the movie that everyone references.
Yes. And then obviously there's some conflict around this. She ends up leaving. He ends up staying at the bar. But I did like the aspect of that scene where sometimes when you have OCD, I don't know about you, but for me, intrusive thoughts are wild. And sometimes I've found that like I have kind of said out loud some of the random kind of distressing things I've thought about. And then after I say that, it's like, oh my God, why did I say that out loud? Like, that was not the vibe. So there was a moment I felt, I was like, okay, maybe they're trying to do that with that scene. What do you think?
I might consider that interpretation generous. I would say I understand what you're referring to, especially when sort of a thought has such charge to it, such anxiety-ridden baggage that the only way to sort of neutralize the anxiety or feeling is to externalize it. To me, that has only ever happened with smaller things, not well thought out plans to have one person seduce another. But that's just my interpretation. I think more this was just the other side of Melvin, the not OCD side, the everything else side of Melvin at the wheel. But that's perhaps my interpretation of it.
All of you listeners will have to watch, and then you can tell us your thoughts.
And all of you listeners will have to sit through 2 hours and 19 minutes of following around the worst person in the world. That's the real pitch of this movie. It's not, what if a guy with OCD tries to find love? It's, what if a guy who's such an asshole tries to find love?
Yes. And also, the guy who's such an asshole who's trying to find love gives you, like, murderer vibes, just because all I can associate with him is The Shining. And in every single scene, honey, I'm home. Like, I was trying so hard to be like, maybe he is sweet. And maybe that's another reason why I was really biased against him. But because I've, like you were saying, him as a romantic comedy actor. It's like if we had John Wayne as, like, I don't know,
Genghis Khan, which happened.
You know, I have not seen that depiction, but I can imagine that I would probably have a hard time connecting.
There's some YouTube clips you can check out. Jack Nicholson is known for such amazing roles, and I don't say amazing sarcastically. These are genuinely amazing roles. As Frank Costello in The Departed, and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and obviously The Shining, and lots of other... Oh my goodness, there's this movie called Not As Good As It Gets. There's a legal drama with Tom Cruise. It was actually Aaron Sorkin's first movie. It was called A Few Good Men. And he is this really antagonistic character there too, and he's incredible. And I think he just works really well as this, like, that's probably my favorite part of the movie, putting Jack Nicholson in the shoes of this antagonistic character. I just thought the choice of using this antagonistic character was incredibly strange as a rom-com protagonist that we're meant to kind of pity a little bit. There's a wonderful quote from Roger Ebert, legendary film critic, and he had this to say. He hurls racist, sexist, homophobic, and physical insults at everyone he meets, and because it's Nicholson, we let him. We know there has to be a payback somehow. If you see the movie, ask yourself how Nicholson's tirades would sound coming from any other actor. They'd bring the film to an appalled halt. And yeah, like, someone with as much, like, anti-hero cred as Jack Nicholson, people give him a lot of slack because, like, it's kind of like the Walter White, Tony Soprano kind of thing, you know? So I just found that review very interesting.
Yeah, it makes sense. Why do you think they decided to make OCD part of this film from, like, a director, like, filmmaker perspective?
From a director filmmaker perspective, I don't know. It is my intuition that they wanted to show something with a more alienating aspect of his life that we could visually see. In my opinion, we already have that in the way that he treats other characters. If they had just went with the OCD and then not all the hatefulness, then the audience would side with him a bit more, because they'd be like, oh, poor guy, he's going through something that we don't really understand, but we know that he's hurting and he's losing all these friends and he can't make any connections. But they had to have the really antagonistic side there as well. So if I were writing this film, I'd probably pick one or the other, and the choice would dictate a lot of how the film plays out, because in this film as it is, these characters give him a lot of chances, over and over and over again. He says friendship ending, relationship ending things every other line, and these characters are like, ugh, Melvin, why'd you say that? One more and you're out of here. And then, like, 5 minutes later, like, okay, Melvin, here's how I'm gonna help you, you know?
Literally, and I don't think I heard him apologize once in that movie.
No. Juliet, the only apology you need is some Jack Nicholson riz, you know? You make me want to be a better man. Everyone's hearts just, like, melt. Like, oh, I forgive you. Hey, you want to know how much this movie cost?
Ooh, yeah.
$50 million. It made $314 million. Isn't that bananas? They do not make rom-coms for $50 million anymore.
I mean, they were not even trying to make a rom-com. This just happened.
Right? This just happened.
They were trying to make a drama.
I cannot believe Jim Brooks was, like, looking through the footage, go, you know what? This really speaks to me as a rom-com, you know? Like, let's lighten it up a little bit. This I do know. Before we started recording, I told Juliet I wouldn't be doing lots of IMDb trivia because really anyone can kind of upload that stuff. It's not really, like, fact-checked or anything. but I watched an interview with Jim Brooks. So this is right from his mouth. Let me back up. Any person watching this film in 2024 might notice that Jack Nicholson is 60 years old and Helen Hunt is 34 years old in the film. So, originally James Brooks was like, I don't want someone that young. I want someone more age appropriate. Let's try and find somebody that's a little bit older. The studios actually, Helen Hunt was a big deal at the time. I believe Twister had come out, which I believe she was a part of.
Yeah, because I think that came out in 96 and then this came out in 97.
Yeah. So I think the studios really wanted some extra star power in there. In a very diplomatic way, he goes, oh, and then Helen was amazing, which, yeah, she was. She was very good. She was very relatable. But the choice of casting, that age difference is always going to be kind of a part of it when people are watching it from today.
I'm also wondering, because it took them so long to even plant any seeds that there would be this like romantic interest, they should have just had it be like a friend hangout piece, you know, like these three unlikely people become friends and then they're friends and then there's not a weird just...
Do you think that people would show up to the theater for that?
I would. I thought it was about a murder.
Okay, you did think it was about a murder.
I thought it was about a murder and some friends. I didn't expect, like when she said, I am not going to have sex with you, ever. I was like, okay, cool. Like, this is going to be a friend piece.
No,
like,
this is a 90s romance. Of course they're going to say, oh, I hate you. Never want to see you again. The enemies to lovers is such a common... Come on, Julia, you know this.
The, like, literal aspects of my brain is like, oh, yeah, like, they're just friends. They were not just friends.
When did Sofia Coppola's Lost in Translation come out? Because that was largely just sort of a platonic relation type movie.
Exactly.
That movie... I remember whenever someone would describe that movie, they'd be like, oh yeah, but it's like not a romantic relationship. It's a platonic relationship. It's different. And so the norm is, oh, these two people are going to fall in love because that's what turns people out to the theaters. Which, you know, there's lots that can be talked about there. Let's see what else I got though. They laugh at Simon in the movie for being so cutesy and touchy with his dog. I think the average millennial treats their dog this way. They'd look back and go, yeah, what's the problem? Yeah, the dog doesn't want to do that. Why would you make the dog do that? What? Oh, there's one moment which makes sense in the context of fiction. And I even do this in the movie that we did, Exposure. Something happens in the plot that makes the obsession less front and center, and so therefore the compulsion doesn't happen. I think this is about like 5/6 through the movie because so much character change is kind of squashed in the end of the movie there. But there's this one moment where he forgets to lock his door because he's so deep in the drama with romance with Helen Hunt's character, Carol. And I just wrote down in my notes, the power of love makes him forget to do a compulsion. And you know what? Fine. It's the 90s. It's a movie. Like, at least that was a plot thing that was motivated by the OCD. Like, that's one moment that couldn't be written out and just replaced with him being a regular dick, you know? I got one more fact for you.
Hit it.
Betty White turned down a role in this film because of that dog garbage chute scene. At the very beginning of this film, Jack Nicholson, when we're introducing what a rough around the edges but redeemable guy, puts a dog down a garbage chute. Later on, he bonds with this dog, and they become best friends and all that fun stuff. He still put a dog down a garbage chute. It's one of those things where it's like, huh?
And also, when we think about people with OCD, like, they might have thoughts, like intrusive thoughts of like, oh, kill your dog, or like throw your dog out the window, or like push that baby into the traffic, or whatever. And the like thought itself is so distressing that they would rather just like not pick the baby up, or like give the dog away so that way they don't accidentally do that thing. And the fact that in the first 30 seconds of the movie, he is like physically... When I thought the movie was about a murder, then I thought, maybe it's a mystery and they're trying to solve what happened to the dog.
And we're given, like, Rian Johnson style, we're given the answer to the thing at the very beginning, and we're trying to see the detectives solve the crime of the missing dog down the garbage chute.
Columbo.
Yeah, that would have been something. That may have been better than As Good as It Gets. To wrap this up, I did not dislike this movie. I'm very conflicted because, honestly, the dialogue was a lot of fun. There were some really good lines. I think there are certain concessions I'll make because it was of its time, but at the same time, because people like Betty White turned down the role in the movie because that scene was so ridiculous, then there were people there at the time saying, hey, this is a bridge too far for a guy we're supposed to care about. I will say, though, maybe I was won over by the riz of Jack Nicholson. I see a spark of a gold-hearted man deep down within there behind that, like, crooked smile that he does. I don't think Juliet feels that way.
I don't feel that way. Feel that way at all. I think I would have liked the movie a lot more if the kind of subplot of him having OCD was not in it. I wouldn't have been a huge fan of him as a character, but the kind of like unexpected trio, the friends, the very unexpected romance that threw me off. Maybe I'm just gay and I like don't, that's probably what it is. I'm just like, where is the woman that Helen will be with?
Maybe you just took the people's words at face value, which is a totally okay thing to do.
I think that's probably the case, yes. I think because I was looking at the movie from like an OCD depiction, I had a lot of difficulty with it. But I will say it wasn't all bad. There were some scenes I thought were well done. I really liked Helen Hunt's character and Greg, his last name.
Simon. Greg Kinnear's character's name is Simon.
I really liked his character. I loved Verdell the dog. A+ acting on their part. If you're looking to watch this to feel connected to a character who might be also going through things that you are with OCD, I would not recommend this movie. You probably will just feel upset and frustrated at them and be like, that's not at all what I experience.
This does not get the Juliet stamp of approval.
I'd say, so I was thinking out of 5, I would probably give this movie like a 1.5 out of 5 in terms of my review. Like, well, maybe 2 out of 5.
Whew.
Your face made me feel a little doubtful about my critique.
Don't change your answer based on my reaction.
All right.
Stick by your opinions. 1.5.
Riz free, this movie is 1.5. With, I guess if there's the Jack Nicholson Riz, maybe a 2 out of 5.
If you're into that Jack Nicholson Riz, I know I am. Okay, well, hey, everyone, real quick, thank you so much. We're going to make this kind of a regular thing. My name's Peter. I made a movie called Exposure with my team. It's a psychological thriller about OCD, a very different film from As Good As It Gets, but you can watch it on Amazon, Apple, all these VOD platforms and see for yourself.
And I'm Juliet. I'm an OCD therapist. I have an Instagram account and a Patreon, and I make lots of fun videos and reels and things where I embarrass myself in the name of OCD awareness and OCD advocacy. As they say, you know, even the best films, maybe not As Good As It Gets, but even the best films have to come to an end. And even the best podcasts have to come to an end. So we're going to wrap up for today, but please let us know what you thought. Please let us know if you end up watching the movie, what your thoughts are. And if you have any requests about movies, TV shows, media we can review, please let us know. And be sure to follow us on Instagram at intrusive_plots.
Heck yeah. And one thing I will say is that this podcast did not near crack halfway through the runtime of As Good As It Gets.
Amen.
Bye.
Bye.